Basic principles in the Scheveningen variation of the Sicilian defence. The Scheveningen variation occurs after the opening moves of 1 e4, c5, 2 knight f3, d6, 3 d4, c takes d4, 4 knight takes d4, knight to f6, 5 knight to c3, and now black continues with the move 5 e6. On the other side of this tape we looked at the dragon variation, which occurs with the move 5 g6. The move 5 e6 is initially far more passive than the move g6. Black is preparing to develop his bishop very quietly on the e7 square rather than the much more active g7 square, but the benefit is that he avoids weakening his kingside position early on and giving white a target for any sort of kingside attack. The move 5 e6 emphasizes black's extra center pawn, which he always has in the Sicilian defense when white plays the main line continuations by playing d4. This extra centre pawn is one of the main reasons why the Sicilian defence is so popular. As you can see in this variation, where black has his pawns on d6 and e6, he has a very solid position. He controls the central squares on his fourth rank. He controls all the squares from c5 along to f5, and this makes it very difficult for white to launch a direct attack against the black position. The black formation is very compact and his central control is very good. The drawback of this for black is that he has wasted some time in the opening. White has got open lines for all his pieces and already has 2 pieces developed, whereas black has only 1 piece in the game. And so the early themes that usually occur in the Sicilian defence, and especially in this variation, are that white will attempt to make use of his development advantage before black can develop all his pieces. If black were to simply be allowed to just develop his position, then he would simply stand well because of his extra centre pawn, which gives him control of the centre. And control of the centre, all other things being equal, is nearly always a good thing to have. Black will usually continue his development with the move bishop to e7, castle kingside, and then he will come to the development of his queenside pieces. He has many possibilities here. His queen's knight can either come to the c6 square, where it will pose a threat to the white knight on d4, and black will sometimes threaten to exchange off knights on d4. It's generally in black's interest in the Sicilian defence to try to exchange off pieces if he can. This is because the white advantage lies in superior development, and so every time that black exchanges off a piece, he is limiting the white developmental advantage. Also, the simplified positions in the Sicilian defence also usually tend to favour black. This extra centre pawn that I mentioned earlier can often prove very useful the more simplified the position is. Also, white frequently has attacking ideas in mind in the Sicilian defence, and of course to play for an attack and to play for mate, white needs to have many pieces on the board, and black can sometimes diffuse the threat of white's attacking gestures by exchanging pieces. So that would be one aim of the move knight to c6. It's also just simply a good developing move, and points at the central squares d4 and e5. The other possible development of the queen's knight would be to the square d7, which the advantages of this move are less immediately obvious, but black can prepare to develop his bishop on b7 with this move, and sometimes the knight can come to c5 and put pressure on the e-pawn, or perhaps to the square b6 to prepare to come to c4, particularly when black has brought a rook to the c-file. This is an example of black making use of the half-open c-file which he has in the Sicilian defence. As regards his queen's bishop, black has again two possibilities. He can either develop it on d7, which is a slightly passive development, but sometimes has the possibility of, if this move is played in conjunction with knight c6, he has the possibility of exchanging knights on d4 and then bringing this bishop to c6, where it plays against the white e-pawn. Also, the bishop on d7 can help to support the advance pawn to b5, which is another very typical black theme in the Sicilian defence. The alternative development of the black queen bishop is to the b7 square. This would normally be prefaced by the moves a6 and b5, or less frequently simply the move b6. From b7 the bishop will bear down on the centre, and in particular the white e-pawn, putting pressure on the white e-pawn and making it difficult for white to carry out his attacking gestures. Also, white in this variation frequently plays the move f4 with the aim of continuing e5, aiming to dislodge the knight from f6. And if he does this, it can be seen that the long white diagonal will be somewhat weakened, and if black has a bishop on b7, he is in a good position to exploit this, particularly if the white king has been committed to the king's side. So this is how black can go about developing his queenside pieces. He can also usually try to bring a rook to the c-file, or sometimes play his queen to c7, and then expand slowly on the queen side with moves a6 and b5, aiming to indirectly put pressure on the white centre by attacking the e-pawn with his pieces, and also by threatening to gain more space on the queen side with the move b4, which would dislodge the white knight on c3 and bring extra pressure onto the white centre. So those are black's main ideas in this variation, and so what can white do to counter these ideas? One thing that is obvious is that white must play a very active, aggressive plan if he can, in order to disrupt the black position before the black advantages make themselves felt. He has two main ways in which he can attempt to do this. One of them is by an advance of the kingside pawns. Now, in the initial position of the Scheveningen variation with 5e6, a very common move is the move 6g4, which is known as the Keres attack. Now, this heralds a very quick advance of all the kingside pawns. White will try to continue with the move g5, which will kick the knight out of f6, which was putting some pressure on the white centre, and then perhaps continue with f4 to f5, and sometimes advancing the h-pawn as well. As once the black knight has been removed from f6, if the black king commits itself to the king's side, then white has a very natural lever to open lines by advancing his pawns on the king's side. The move 6g4 of course creates weaknesses in the white position, but white can afford to play moves like this because he has the first move, and black has played an opening whereby he is to a certain extent sacrificing early development in order to gain positional advantages. The other main way in which white can attempt to disrupt the black plan is by playing initially more quietly and simply developing his pieces with the bishop to e2, castle kingside, and the move pawn to f4, but then attempting to play the move e5 in the centre of the board. Again, as in the other line where white was attempting to remove the black knight with the move g5, he is here attempting to remove the black knight with the move e5. Now if he can do this, then if the black king is on the king side, as it nearly always is, then it will be dangerously short of defensive pieces, and white would have good chances to score with a direct kingside attack. The typical white developing moves in this plan are the moves bishop to e2. This is quite a passive development of the bishop, but it's difficult to see where else the white bishop can go. He could put the bishop on c4, but as already mentioned, black's counterplay in this variation often comes with the moves a6 and b5, and the white bishop on c4 would be a target here which would help black to further his aims on the queen side, although white would have compensating pressure in the centre and against the black king side. If the bishop were instead developed on d3, then the knight on d4 would be deprived of the defence of the white queen on d1, and this would enable black to gain counterplay. So white normally contents himself with the simple developing move bishop e2. He occasionally develops the bishop on g2 instead. This is another fairly common plan, which is again a fairly quiet development of the bishop, but white will then be looking towards the middle game where he's hoping to advance his kingside pawns, and if a black bishop does come to b7, then there will be a white bishop to oppose it on g2. But the development of this bishop on e2 is the most popular, and white can then castle kingside. He normally doesn't want to castle queenside because black is planning to expand on the queenside with a6 and b5, and white doesn't want his king to be living there if black is going to be opening lines there. And then white will continue with f4. This is a very important move as it increases white's space and his central control, and most importantly it attempts to force through the advance e5, which is something that white nearly always attempts to do in this variation. So far we've got the developing moves of bishop e2, castles kingside, and f4. Now the other moves that fit into this white plan are the moves bishop on c1 to e3. This is again to support this knight on d4, which black sometimes uses to gain counterplay, and the move queen to e1. Moving the queen to e1 prepares in certain variations to bring the queen out to g3, again to support this very important e5 advance, and also to free the d file for white to bring his rook to. So how can black try to counter this plan of the white advance in the centre with e5? Well, one of the things that he must try and do if possible is to defend the e5 square with as many pieces as he can in order to make it as difficult as possible for white to carry out this advance. This is another benefit of the move queen to c7, which was discussed earlier. Move queen to c7 puts pressure on the open c file, but also places a guard on the e5 square, which makes it more difficult for white to advance. The black knight will often develop to the square c6 or d7, which again both cover the e5 square and make it difficult for white to carry out his plans. However, white will nearly always be able to play the advance e5 if he wants to, and so black must be careful that he leaves open a useful retreat square for his knight in the event of white being able to play his e5 advance. for example, if he has his bishop on d7 and he hasn't yet castled, if white plays the move e5, then black might have to retreat the knight to g8, which would clearly be unpleasant for him, and he must always be aware of white's possibility of advancing with e5 and be prepared to retreat his knight to, if he possibly can, to d7 or perhaps to d5. Another way for black to attempt to counter the white move of e5 is to play the move e5 himself. This would normally occur at a later stage than the opening stage of the game. The black move e5 would also gain some time, as it would attack the white knight on d4 and force it to either retreat or perhaps to exchange on c6 if a black knight has come to c6. But the move e5 clearly has its drawbacks, the most obvious of which is the weakening of the d5 square. There are many variations of the Sicilian defence where black does nevertheless advance e5 in some circumstances or other, and accepts a weakening of the d5 square in order to gain a stronghold in the centre and to hope to develop active piece play to counteract this weakness that he has on d5. After the black move of e5, there will frequently be an exchange of pawns on the f4 square, and both sides will then be left with an isolated pawn. White will have an isolated pawn on e4, and black will have one on d6. An isolated pawn is a pawn which cannot be supported by any of its fellow pawns and must constantly be guarded by pieces. Both sides will then have outposts as well. White will have an outpost on d5, and black will have one on e5, an outpost being a square where one player can safely place a piece without fear of it being dislodged by an opponent's pawn. So that's an outline of the major possibilities for both sides in this variation. Of course, there are other ways to play, but the thematic points are the black queenside expansion and the white either kingside expansion with the advance of the kingside pawns, or the play in the centre with the move e5. I would now like to look at a game which demonstrates some of these plans in action. This is the game Hartston against Larsen, which was played in 1974. And if you now set up the position after the move 5e6, the basic position of the Scheveningen variation. Play in this game continued with 6 bishop to e2, and now black played the move 6 pawn to a6. White now castled kingside. Black played the move queen to c7. White now played pawn to f4, and black played bishop to e7. All these moves are, of course, very obvious in the context of the plans for both sides in this position. White now played a waiting move. He played the move king to h1. Black frequently gains counterplay in the Sicilian defence on the g1 to a7 diagonal, as especially when white has made the advance f2 to f4. As can be seen, this is a slightly weakened diagonal, and black sometimes has some tactics along this diagonal which cause problems for white. And so the move king h1 is often a useful waiting move, as when the complications arise later in the game, it will sometimes be quite useful for white to have his king off this dangerous diagonal, so that moves like queen to b6 don't occur with check. Black now castled kingside, and white played the thematic move 10 queen to e1, which was preparing to bring the queen out to g3 and perhaps to bring a rook to the d file. Now black continued with knight to c6. One of white's drawbacks of his last move, queen to e1, was a removal of a defence of the knight on d4, and black immediately tries to exploit this by developing his knight with a threat to the white knight. Now if white were to try to capture this knight, knight takes c6, this would be a poor way to play, as black could capture with his b pawn, which is capturing towards the centre and increasing his central control, and also white would have lost one of his main centralised pieces. So white defended this knight with the move 11 bishop to e3. If white now captured this knight, white could recapture with the bishop, and in place of his well-placed centralised knight, he would now have a well-placed centralised bishop. So black decided not to do this, and instead he got on with his plans with the move 12b5. This is a multi-purpose move. It develops the black queen side play, gaining black space on the queen side and putting a guard over the c4 square, which is sometimes a useful square for black in this variation. It also prepares to annoy white with the threat of advancing to b4, which would undermine white's defence of the e4 square, and white would then have to be careful not to lose his e pawn. It also prepares the move bishop to b7. The advantages of this move have already been indicated, that it inhibits the move e5 because of the consequent weakening of the long white diagonal, and also again attacks indirectly attacks the white e pawn. So white now continued with the quiet move 13a3. I mentioned earlier that white must be careful not to play too passively in variations of the Sicilian defence, as the positional advantages tend to be on the black side, but the threat of b4 was really too strong to be allowed, and so it does make sense for white to take a small time out from his kingside ambitions to try to slow black's queenside counterplay down. It's all right for white to sacrifice one tempo here, as black will in turn have to sacrifice perhaps a couple of tempi in order to advance his b pawn further if he wants to. So black simply continued with his development with bishop to b7, and now white developed his queen to g3. The advantages of this move have already been indicated, the pressure on the e5 square, and this queen is also beginning to point in the direction of the black king, which could give black some cause for alarm. Black now exchanged off the knight on d4, playing the move knight takes d4, and white of course recaptured with his bishop. Now the white e-pawn is en prise. Black has two pieces attacking this, the bishop and the knight, and white has only one piece defending it, his knight. But of course black cannot capture this pawn, because white with his move of queen g3 would now be allowed to play the move queen takes g7, which would be mate if black were foolish enough to capture the e-pawn. But of course this was not black's intention when he exchanged off knights. His intention is now revealed as he continues with the move bishop to c6. That's the move 14, bishop to c6. This is a nice move for black. Again, it has many points. It is preparing to play the move queen to b7, which would put extra pressure on this long white diagonal and give white a concern over his e-pawn. And also, after black has played the move queen b7, his b pawn is now sufficiently defended to enable him to continue with the advance a5. When white played the move a3, it can be seen that he was slowing down the black queenside counterplay, because it was difficult for black to get his pawn to b4, because to advance a5 would have left the b pawn emprise, and now white's investment of one tempo with the move a3 has been rewarded, because black has had to use up two tempi in playing bishop to c6 and, well, with his intended follow-up of queen to b7, in order to advance the a pawn if he so wants to. White now played rook on a1 to e1. This was preparing to defend the e pawn after the white bishop moves. The white bishop is intending to come to d3 in this position, because when white plays his advance of e5, then the bishop will be pointing dangerously at the black king side, particularly the h7 square, and black would have to be very careful then with these two white bishops pointing at his king side, which would be weakened when with the removal of the black knight from the strong defensive f6 square. So black continued with queen to b7. Now black is perhaps really threatening to take the e pawn off, as he would be able to capture with the bishop, and when white captured, to take with the queen. Although it's not clear that this would in fact be possible, but it's clearly enough to worry white, and so he continues with the move bishop to d3, which is in any case a very useful move, bearing in mind that white has kingside attacking ambitions in this game. Black now continued in this position with the move rook a8 to d8. This is a subtle way of inhibiting white from playing the e5 advance, as in the event of white doing this, black would capture with the d pawn, and there would be a threat from the rook on d8 against the white bishop on d4, which would mean that white would have to recapture this pawn on e5 with his bishop, which is not what he wants to do. What he wants to do is to recapture with the f pawn if he possibly can, to kick the black knight out of f6, and then to attempt to deliver mate on the king side, as white would then have a very strong attacking position. So this move rook to d8 is inhibiting the move e5. And white now continues with the move 17 queen to h3. Again, he's here trying to play the move e5, because after black takes with the d pawn and white recaptures with the f pawn, there would be a mate threat on h7 if the black knight were to move, and so this may allow white to leave his bishop on d4 hanging, because after black captured this, white would be able to capture with his pawn on the knight on f6 with his pawn on e5, and there would be a dual threat of a mate on h7 and a capture of the black bishop on e7. So this move queen to h3 is clearly very difficult for black to meet, and he's now forced to make a weakening move on the king side, either the move g6 or the move h6. This queen h3 is a very nice subtle move by white. Again, it's a demonstration of how the crude attacking continuations don't often work when black has a solid defensive position, as he does have here. But here white is manoeuvring to force a weakness in the black position before he launches his assault. Now, black decided that he wanted to defend against this e5 threat with the move h6. His other possibility was the move g6, which again would have presented white a target, and white could perhaps have either continued immediately with the move f5, which would be probing this weakness that black had created, or he could perhaps have prepared this move somehow. But clearly, however black plays, white is he's going to have to weaken his kingside position somehow, which will give white extra attacking opportunities. White now continued with the move 18 rook to e3. Now this is, in a sense, this is an admission that black has succeeded in the battle over the white advance e5, as white is now admitting that he can't really play this e5 move, but in compensation he has managed to get black to weaken his kingside with this move h6, which provides a very nice target for the white kingside attack. And so now he's preparing to swing his rook over from e3 to g3 when there will already be a threat to capture on h6 with the queen due to the pin on the g file. And this would demonstrate what the weakness of this h6 move. Black now countered with the move b4 on the queen side. At long last, black manages to play this advance. He has to get some counterplay quickly here, because if white is given a free hand to develop his plans on the king's side, black could find himself mated very quickly. White has a very nice attacking formation here. Both his bishops and his rooks and his queen are all pointing at the black king, which doesn't have all that many pieces defending it. So black continues with this move b4, hoping to gain counterplay on the queen side and in the centre before anything happens on the king's side. White captured this pawn, a takes b4, and black continued with queen takes b4, which attacks the white bishop on d4 and also the white pawn on b2. Now white continued with the move knight from c3 to e2, which is a convenient way of defending against both threats. Also, the white knight on c3 was the only piece which was not participating in the white kingside attack, and so white is now preparing to swing this knight round into the thick of things. The rest of this game can be found in the accompanying booklet. It resulted in a win for white after his kingside attack proved to be more powerful than black's counterplay. But this does not, of course, necessarily mean that black is doing badly in this position. His mistakes came later. Here, black does have possibilities for counterplay, as he has opened lines on the queen's side, and as white has committed his pieces to the king's side, he is somewhat short of defenders there. This is a very difficult and balanced position, but the course of this game does demonstrate how the plans that were discussed earlier can be put into action in a game. The other game in the booklet demonstrates a game where everything went right for black, and the white kingside play didn't get off the ground, and it shows how strong this black queenside counter can be if he can get it in without an accident befalling him on the king's side.